We begin today the Gemara on Daf Yud Amud Beis, 5 lines up from the bottom of the Amud where it says Tanan Hasam. The Gemara before brought the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that says that just like the Chatos and the Pesach, if you shecht it Shaloi Lishma, it invalidates the carbon completely. So too regarding the Asham. And he learned it out from the Pasuk. There's a Hekish. The Pasuk says Kachatos Ka'asham, which means whatever applies to the Chatos applies to the Asham as well. So here the Gemara is going to bring a Mishnah from later in the Masechta where there's a discussion, a Machlekes, which is connected to the same Hekish of Kachatos Ka'asham in the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And also, we learned later in the Masechta, Shahaya Rabbi Akiva said, Kol domim shenichnesu lahechal, the bloods of any carbon that by mistake was brought inside the Heichal of the Beis HaMikdash, even though it's not supposed to be, the blood is supposed to be sprayed on the outside Mizbeach, so it was brought inside L'chaper, to atone for there, psulim. This will invalidate the whole carbon just by the fact that it was brought into the wrong place. It was brought inside. Now, what's Rabbi Akiva's source? Because in the pasuk where it says that you shouldn't bring the blood inside, then it's going to passel it. It's actually a pasuk that says explicitly by the carbon chatos. But as Rashi here brings, the pasuk there says v'chol. It doesn't say chatos. It says v'chol chatos ashiyuvim midama. Then it'll be passel. So from the word v'chol, Rabbi Akiva darshans that we say that this applies to any carbon that the blood was brought inside. That's Rabbi Akiva. V'chacham that is first. Chachamim argue and say chatas bolvad. No, the pasuk says by the chatas, this halacha applies only to the chatas. Rabbi Eliezer says af ha'asham. The asham as well, the blood that's brought inside, it will passel the carbon. Shenemar, because the pasuk says kachatos ka'asham, that we compare the two, the chatas and asham have the same halacha regarding this psul if the blood is brought inside. Says the Gemara, so Rabbi Eliezer kidekama time. We understand that Rabbi Eliezer's opinion why he compares the asham to the chatas as he says. That's the hekish of kachatas ka'asham. Well, El Rabbanon, however, according to the Rabbanon, my time or my tamayu, what is their reason? Why do they not say this hekish? So Rava answers, asham nichnas dame lefnim pasul. This halacha that a asham, if the blood is brought inside, that it should invalidate the carbon. Lo imatzasamrit. You can't say that we learn it from this hekesher. Why? Because kavachaymer meyayla. I'll show you a kavachaymer from a carbon oyla that the blood brought inside remains kosher. The carbon remains kosher. Because ma oyla shehi kolor. The carbon oyla is stringent that it has to be completely burnt on the mizbeach. However, nichnas damal lifnim, if the blood was brought inside the Beis HaMikdash ksheira, it remains kosher. Asham she'ene kolul, so the carbon asham that does not have to completely be burnt on the mizbeach, like kol shekain. So most definitely, it should not become pasul. So the Gemara asks on this kavachayim from the oyla, but mala oyla shekain ena mechaperes. How could you learn from oyla? Oyla is not brought as a kapara for anything. Minchas chayte, or not the same kind of kapara as a chatos or an asham. So therefore I can't learn from there. Asham is more compared to a chatas. Says the Gemara, minchas chayte techiach, but then I could learn out the same halacha from a carbon mincha for a sinner, that over there as well, if it's brought inside when it's not supposed to be, it won't pass all this carbon. Now this minchas chayte we're talking about over here is the carbon oila v'yayid. For example, a person that said false testimony, he has to bring a carbon. If he's poor, he brings a carbon mincha. That's for a chet as well, similar to the asham, and it's not going to invalidate the carbon. So I could learn asham from here. Now the Gemara just interjects over here in this limud from Minchas Chayte, and it asks, why are we proving the point that if it goes inside, it will not passel the carbon specifically from the mincha, which is flour? It's not at all similar to a behemoth. Why wouldn't we compare first to a chatas ha'oif, a chatas of a bird, that also if it's brought inside it would not become pasul, and I should learn the asham from there? Says the Gemara, chatas ha'oif, actually regarding a chatas, if it's a bird, baya de Rabavani. This is an ibaya of Rabavan later in the Masechta, and therefore the Gemara doesn't bring that up. Okay, but now the Gemara goes on to explain how we're learning out the asham from the oyla we said, but then we refuted that, and now we're saying we could learn it from the minchas chayte. And now the limud continues and goes as follows. And then you'll refute this that you learn out the asham from the minchas chayte as follows. Mala minchas chayte. When you bring the mincha for this sinner and you brought not blood, but you brought the flour inside the heichal, it's not going to invalidate the carbon So you want to compare the asham to there? I'll tell you it's different. Sheken eina min zevach. It's not an animal that's slaughtered. So how could you learn the asham from the minchas chayte? So Ayla Techiach, we go back to the Ayla that's brought inside and does not invalidate the carbon. But Chazar Adin, and this limit goes back and forth between the Ayla and the Minchas Chayte. Loire Izekir Izev, Loire Izekir Izev, the stringency of one is not like the other, or the leniency rather. In this case, it's a leniency. Each one has a unique leniency, and therefore I say that it does not invalidate it when it goes inside, but they're not the same. So that cannot be the cause of the din. Rather, Hatzad HaShav Shebehen, it's the common denominator between the Ayla and the Minchas Chayte, that is Shehein Kotche Kotchim. They're both Kotche Kotchim. And V'nichnas Lifnim Ksherin. And if it's brought inside the Heichel, it'll still remain kosher. Afanim Avi Asham. So therefore I could compare it to the Asham and say the same thing applies. Shu Kodesh Kadoshim. The Asham is also a carbon that's Kodesh Kadoshim. V'nichnas Dame Lifnim. Even if the blood is brought inside the Beis HaMikdash when it's not supposed to be kosher, it'll be kosher. Therefore, the Chachamim do not learn out the Asham from the Chatas. The Chatas itself is the clear pasuk. Chol Chatas Ashiyuv Dama Lefnim, it becomes pasuk. That's a clear pasuk. So Amalei Ravim Barnish Leravashi, but Rav now asks on this Tzad HaShaveh that you learn out the Asham from the two. From which two? From Ayla and Minchas Chayte. But v'lifraich, he can refute this limud from the two of them and say, Ma lahatzat ashav shebehen. Both of these, they have something that's a leniency about them that's not by asham. What is that? Sheken ein lahen kitzvah. Both of these, there is no set amount of value of money that the carbon has to cost when you bring this carbon. Asham, whereas when it comes to a asham, there's a unique halacha by an asham, a stringency, sheyesh loy kitzvah. It has to be a kesef shkolim. Rashi brought this before already. There has to be a certain amount of money in the value of this carbon asham. So since asham has a certain stringency that these two do not have, so maybe here I should learn out the asham not from these two. I should learn out from the chatos, that it also has the stringency if the blood is brought inside, that it should be possible. So therefore, the Gemara says that the opinion of the Chachamim is not based on a Kavachaimer or on a Tzad HaShaveh, but it's based on a different pasuk. The source of the Rabbana that say that the asham that's brought inside will not become pasul like the chatos. That's because the amakra in the pasuk where it says this psul by the chatos, the pasuk there says dama. The whole pasuk there says v'chol chatos asheyuva midama eloy l'chav b'kadosh lo'isachol b'eish tisaref. If its blood is brought inside, it's pasul. You have to burn it. But it says dama. It doesn't just say if you bring blood. It says its blood. So that means dama shalzu, the loy dama shalacha. That's an exclusion. Only if the blood of the chatos is brought inside the heichal will it invalidate the whole carbon, but not from another carbon. That's where the Rabbanan learned this out from. So now what does Rabbi Eliezer say about this? Why does Nidashin from this word dama to exclude asham? The answer is, the word dama is coming to say something else. Dama v'loy b'sara. It's saying if you bring the bloods inside the heichal, then it'll passel the carbon, but not the meat of the carbon. If the basar is brought inside of the heichal, it will not passel it. That's why it has to say the blood. Now, v'idach, but the Chachamim will answer to this, dam, dama. It could have said in the pasuk just blood, dam. I would know then that it means the blood and not the basar. Why does it say dama with the extra hay? It's blood. That's coming to add the drasha that we just said. Only the blood of this carbon, but not any other carbon, and therefore it does exclude the asham. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, dam dama loy darish. This additional diuk of the addition of the hay, he does not darshan. Since the Torah has to write the word dam to exclude if the meat is brought inside the heichal, that it will not invalidate the carbon. So it's the derech of the pasuk to write in this style with that hay meat dama, and it's not an extra diuk, and therefore he learns out from kachatos ka'asham that the asham is like the chatos, that if the blood is brought inside, it'll be pasul. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the halacha of the asham, that there was this general machlokes here. Going back again to the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer says that a asham, if you have a kavanah shalei lishma, it'll be pasul just like a chatos. That's part of this hekesh that you learn out kachatos ka'asham. But according to the Rabbanan, by a chatos, if you shech the shalei lishma, it'll invalidate the carbon. Not by an asham. By an asham, if you shech the shalei lishma, the carbon itself will still be kosher. So the Gemara asks now this machlokes. We could understand according to the Rabbanan's opinion. The Omri, they say, Asham sheshachta shalei lishma kosher. When you shechta Asham shalei lishma, it's still kosher. So now Hainu the iskish mincha lachatas and mincha laasham. This is the meaning of the pasuk where it compares a carbon mincha to the chatas, and it compares the carbon mincha to the asham. This is actually in this pasuk, when it says in the pasuk that the mincha will be kachatas v'cha asham. The beginning of that pasuk speaks about a mincha. It says, loisi afe. I'm not sure if it's the same pasuk as before, kachatas ka'asham, but it's a different pasuk. Just a moment. That's a different pasuk, kachatas ka'asham, that the Gemara is quoting till now. But here there's another pasuk. If you look at Ois Beis over here in the Ois Vahada Gemara, they bring the pasuk says Lo Siafa Chometz Chelkam Nesat Yersem Misha Kodesh Kadashim Huhi, referring to the mincha. Then it says Kachatas v'Cha'asham. So every mincha, the pasuk is comparing both to a chatas and to a asham. What is it saying here? So according to the Rabbanan, we can understand why it's comparing the mincha to a chatas and why it's also comparing it to an asham. Why is that? The Tanya, as we learned in Abraisa, Rab Shimon says, Kodesh Kadoshim the mincha has a status of Kodesh Kadoshim, kachatas v'kasham. Like both. Sometimes like a chatas or like an asham. And that it depends what kind of mincha this is. Mincha's chayte, if it's the mincha of a sinner, as mentioned before, by the carbon oil v'yoyrit, that he brings, if he's poor, he brings the carbon mincha, harei kachatas. It's going to have the halacha like a chatas. And lefichach, kamtza, shaloi lishma, when he does the kemitza, when he removes with his fingers a little bit of the mincha that you're going to be makriv on the mizbeach, the kemitza of the mincha is instead of a shchita. That's all the different avodas that are done by an animal. You have similar to it by the carbon mincha. The kemitza is similar to shchita. So if you do the kemitza of the mincha and it's done shaloi lishma for this minchas chayta, which is also like a chatas, psula, it'll be pasul. So that's why it says in the pasuk that the mincha is compared to a chatas. On the other hand, it says it's compared to an asham. Why? Because minchas nedava, if a person brings a mincha and it's just a donation, harei ka'asham. So here the halacha will be like the asham. This is according to the chachamim, that a asham shaloi lishma is kosher. Lefichach kamtza shaloi lishma, if you do the kemitza and it's not lishma ksheda, it'll be kosher. So I understand why the pasuk is comparing sometimes to a chatas and sometimes to an asham. Rabbi Eliezer, however, according to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, that says chatas and asham are the same. By both of them, if it's shaloi lishma, it'll be pasul. So lemai hilchase iskish mincha lechatas or mincha leasham. So what is the difference? Why is the Torah comparing the mincha to a chatas and also comparing it to the asham? It's the same thing. Answers the Gemara, lechi idach to Rab Shimon. There's actually another reason why he compares it to chatas and asham. Another brayso, which also happens to be Rab Shimon, that explains what the halacha about the mincha is. That sometimes we say it's like a chatas and sometimes it's like an asham. Tanan, there's a Mishnah in Masechta Menachos where it says, Shaloi bekli shares psula. If you're bringing the kemitza after you remove from the top of the mincha with your fingers, that's the kemitza. You remove from it. What are you supposed to do with this kemitza? You're supposed to place it into another vessel, and then that other vessel you bring to the mizbeach, and you makriv it on the mizbeach. Rashi here says that all the details of the avodah of the mincha corresponds what's done with an animal. The kemitza is like the shchita, and then you put it into another keli, that's like the kabbalah of the dam, you're receiving the blood in another keli. Then you bring it to the mizbeach, that's like the halacha of the dam to the mizbeach. And then when you burn that on the mizbeach, it's not like the burning of a regular carbon. The burning of a mincha on the mizbeach is like the zrika, it's like spraying the blood on the mizbeach. Okay, so now the Mishnah says in Menachos that if you did not put this kemitza into another kli sharis, psula, you're missing a step, and the whole carbon will be pasul. However, Rab Shimon machshe. Rab Shimon says even without this step of putting it into another carbon, another keli that is, it's going to be kosher. He could bring the kemitza in his hands all the way to the mizbeach, similar to when you bring the blood to the mizbeach. He could bring it in his hands and then throw it onto the mizbeach and burn it. Rav Yudah Berei Rab Chiya says, explains, my time with Rab Shimon, what's the source of Rab Shimon to say that even without placing the kemitza into another keli, it'll still be kosher? So he learns it from this pasuk that we're talking about. It says kachatas ka'asham, sometimes compared to the chatas and sometimes to the asham. Amakra kodesh kadashim hi kachatas v'cha'asham. What are the 2 points here? That means that there's 2 ways how you can be makriv the mincha on the mizbeach. If you're bringing the mincha, the kemitza of the mincha, the mizbeach in your hands, you didn't put it into another keli, then oivda biyamin kechatos. Then it has to be done with the right hand, like it's done by the carbon chatos. By the carbon chatos, there's a unique halacha we had before mentioned in the Gemara. The blood is not sprayed from the keli. You have to, Kohen has to stick in his finger into the blood and spray it with his finger. So because it says etzba, whenever it says in the Torah etzba, it means always the right finger. That's what the Gemara learns out later. So over here as well, if you're bringing the kemitza to the mizbech in your hands, it has to be done dafka with the right hand, like the chatas. However, bekeli, or the bachat's bala oivdo bekeli, if you are placing the kemitza into another vessel, and that's how you're bringing it to the mizbech, so then the smile. That actually can be done with the left hand. And that's ka'asham. Like the asham, when you bring the blood to pour in the mizbeach or to spray in the mizbeach, that can be brought with the left hand. There's actually a machlokes about this, as Rashi brings here, whether you could do the aveda with the left hand when you do the zrika. But according to Rab Shimon, regarding a carbon, it could be done with the left hand. So therefore here as well, regarding the mincha, if it's in a keli, it can be done with the left hand. So this is the meaning of the pasuk when it says chatos and asham. If it's done with the hand, it has to be in the right hand, like the chatas, which is done with the finger, with the right finger. And if it's done in a keli, it can be done with the left, a keli that's in the left hand. That's kasham. So we have another thing. This is the same Rab Shimon that learns out from the pasuk kachatas kasham this drasha. So now the Gemara asks for Rab Shimon, hi kra. So now according to Rab Shimon, this same pasuk here, mapik le'lahachi or mapik le'lahachi, he learns out two different points here from this pasuk. The Gemara just brought before that Rab Shimon said that we learn out from Kachatas or Cha'asham something else regarding Shalei Lishma, that a carbon minchas chayte, there's a problem with Shalei Lishma, it's going to invalidate the carbon, and if it's a carbon minchas nedave, it will not invalidate the carbon. How is Rab Shimon himself learning out from the same pasuk two different things? So the Gemara explains, no, the truth is you're right. He's only learning out one thing from here. Ikekra, the main pasuk of kachatas v'cha'asham that it says by the carbon mincha, likid Rav Yehuda bereid Rav Chiya da'asa. It's really coming to teach the second point that we brought here, that Rav Yehuda bereid Rav Chiya explained according to Rab Shimon regarding the carbon mincha, whether it's brought in the hands or it's brought in a keli. Now, minchas chayte, the psula shaloi lishma, the halacha of the carbon mincha for the chayte, that it's pasha shaloi lishma, he doesn't learn it from this pasuk. He has a different source for that. And what's the source? It says in the pasuk, because chatos, taimimai, by the carbon chatos itself, a behema, a chatos. What's your source to say that it becomes completely possible if you bring it shlei lishma? Tichsiv ba he, because it says in the pasuk he. It actually says in the pasuk hu. So that word hu chatos hu is saying that it must be brought for the sake of the chatos. So michas chaytanam miksiv ba he. By the carbon mincha of the chatas, it also says in the pasuk the word he. It says in the pasuk that leitnalel levaina ki chatas he. So that teaches me that it has to be done l'shma. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the Gemara discussing over here the lashon of the pasuk chatas v'cha'asham that it says by the mincha. The Gemara now comes back to one final point, explaining the opinion of the Rabbanan. And the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and say that only the chatas, when it's brought shaloi lishma, it invalidates the carbon completely, but not the asham. But Rabbi Eliezer before brought a hekish, kachatas v'cha asham. So what is how did Rabbanan explain that hekish? Says the Gemara, asham l'chatas. According to the Rabbanan, for what detail are we comparing the asham to the chatas? The answer is loy melacha. The comparison is here only to tell you ma chatas tu'un smiche. Just like the chatas, before you bring the carbon, you have to lean with all your might on the head of the animal. Af asham ton smiche. So too regarding the asham, it doesn't say clearly in the pasuk, but the asham as well will require smiche. So it's only this detail that it's compared, not for anything else. Okay, this is the conclusion of this explanation, the machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham. Now the Gemara goes to the next opinion of the Mishnah. It said, Yosef ben Chayni Omer Hanishchatin. So what it actually said in the Mishnah is, Hanishchatin l'shem Pesach l'shem Chatas psulin. That any carbon that's brought shaloi lishma, and what was your kavanah shaloi lishma, that you're bringing, for example, a carbon shlamim, and you're bringing it l'shem Pesach or l'shem Chatas, it'll be pasul. Meaning, what Yossi ben Chayni is saying is that just like we say that the carbon chatos and the carbon pesach, when it's brought shaloi lishma, they become totally possible. Similar regarding the carbon pesach, that the carbon pesach, which is shechted in its time, that's any other carbon that is, any other carbon that's shechted in its time of the pesach on Yud Daled Nisan in the afternoon. So if it's shechted, if any other carbon is shechted, then l'shem the pesach it'll be possible. And any other carbon as well will be possible if it's shechted l'shem achatas anytime, because the carbon chatas is not only out of Pesach, it's any time of the year. This is the opinion of Yosef ben Chayni. So the concept, just to clarify here, the concept that Yosef ben Chayni is saying is that this unique psul that we find in the Torah regarding the chatas and the Pesach is not only regarding the chatas and the Pesach itself, but it applies to other karbanos as well. When they are brought l'shem the chatos and the Pesach, that will also completely invalidate the carbon. But again, by the Pesach, that's only when it's shechted bizmanoi. If another carbon is shechted on Erev Pesach in the afternoon, then if you shecht it l'shem the Pesach, it'll invalidate the carbon. Now, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, so Rabbi Yechanan said, Yosef ben Chayni, Rabbi Eliezer, Omru, Davar Echad. Yosef ben Chayni and Rabbi Eliezer, which we were speaking about before. Rabbi Eliezer is the one that said that Osham is similar to a Chatas. So he says, Rabbi Eliezer holds the same like Yosef ben Chayni. Rabba Amar, however, Rabba says, Ba'achedim l'shem chatos pligi. They don't hold the same thing. Regarding the Pesach, he would agree that any other carbon shechter erev Pesach in the afternoon l'shem Pesach will be possible. But regarding any other carbon that's shechted l'shem chatos, here Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Rabbi Eliezer says that it will not completely invalidate the carbon, like Yosef ben Chayni says. And the Gemara here brings a lengthy braisa where there's a discussion about this inyan, where we'll see the two opinions here of Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbe, how they learned it out from the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer in this braisa. The Tanya, so we learned in the braisa, ha-Pesach she'ov Rosh Nosai. Carbon Pesach, where it's already, the animal is already past its year, so it can't be brought as a Pesach anymore. V'shachtoi bizmanai. And he shechted it when? In its time. Erev Pesach in the afternoon. And l'shmai, he's shechting it for a Pesach. Or v'chein ha'shechet acherim l'shem Pesach bizmanai. Or he shechts any other carbon for a Pesach when? Bizmanai, in its time, Erev Pesach in the afternoon. Rabbi Eliezer paisel. So Rabbi Eliezer says that this carbon will become pasul. So here we clearly see that Rabbi Eliezer agrees, at least to this detail, that Yosef ben Chayni said that a carbon shechted Pesach in the afternoon, l'shem a Pesach, will be totally pasul. But Rabbi Yeshua machshe. However, Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with him and with Yosef ben Chayni and says that it'll still be kosher. So Rabbi Yeshua explains what his source is, and he says a kal v'chaymer. Rabbi Yeshua, so Rabbi Yeshua says, "Im b'shar yemais hashana she'ena kosher l'shmai." If on any other day of the year that the carbon is not kosher, if it's going to be brought l'shmai, so what he's talking about over here is that the carbon Pesach that's brought in any day of the year, if you bring a carbon Pesach, not Pesach afternoon, of course the carbon Pesach is not kosher. The carbon Pesach must be brought only on Erev Pesach. So if you bring the carbon Pesach on any other day of the year, l'shem a carbon Pesach, that's not a carbon Pesach, it's not in the time. So achedim kshedim l'shmai, but if I bring any other Pesach, l'shem the carbon Pesach on any other day of the year, it's still going to be kosher. No one holds that then they will invalidate the carbon, right? This is the halacha regarding all karbanis that's brought on any day of the year, l'shem the Pesach, that remains kosher. So if so, bizmanoi shehu kosher l'shmai, so if in the time when the Pesach could be brought, out of Pesach in the afternoon, when in the time period when the carbon Pesach is kosher, when it's brought for the Pesach, so most definitely so definitely any other carbon that's brought l'shem the Pesach should be kosher if it's brought for the sake of the Pesach. This is a time period where the Pesach itself would be kosher. So another carbon should definitely be kosher in this time period. This is Rabbi Yeshua's kal v'chaymer. So Amalei Rabbi Eliezer says to him, well, if you're making such a kind of kal v'chaymer, I'll flip around this kal v'chaymer and I'll show you how it's impossible to use this kal v'chaymer at all. Because chiluf advarim, how about if you'll change the order of this kal v'chaymer and you'll come out with a very strange conclusion? And I'll tell you as follows. A carbon Pesach that's brought on any day of the year for the sake of the Pesach. it's not going to be kosher. It's not the time of the Pesach at all, but kosher hu l'shem acherim. But the carbon Pesach that's brought on any day of the year, if you bring it for any other carbon, so then it will be kosher. So bismanoi, the carbon Pesach that's brought in its time period, shehu kosher l'shmai. When you bring the carbon Pesach out of Pesach in the afternoon in its right time, so then the carbon Pesach will be kosher l'shma. Einoi din. So wouldn't there be a kavachayim now regarding the carbon Pesach itself? Sheyuchshar l'shem acherim. That this carbon Pesach itself, if you bring it on Erev Pesach for another carbon, you're bringing it shalei l'shma, the carbon Pesach for sure should be kosher on Erev Pesach in the afternoon. And if so, what's the point there? The conclusion of this kavachayim is v'yuchshar Pesach ba'arba asar shaloi l'shmai. So I have here a kavachayim that the carbon Pesach brought on Erev Pesach in the afternoon should be kosher even it's shaloi l'shma. So v'kach ata imer. Will you say this, that this is true? Will you conclude that this is the case? This is a bit miyah, because this is something that everybody agrees to. We learned before already that the carbon Pesach that's brought Shaloi L'Shma in its time, Pesach in the afternoon, Erev Pesach in the afternoon, everybody agrees that it's going to be possible. So how could you say this kind of kavachaymer? So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer goes on to say, and he explains, that this is the way you have to understand this inyan. This that I find, when I see this fact, that any other carbon that's brought on any day of the year, and it's brought l'shem the carbon Pesach, so then it's going to be kosher. Why is it kosher? Why is any carbon brought on any day of the year going to be kosher if it's brought l'shem the Pesach? Shekein hu kosher l'shem acherim. Just like I see regarding the Pesach itself, that the Pesach itself that's brought on any day of the year for any other carbon, what happens? It becomes kosher because the carbon Pesach, as we learned before already, the carbon Pesach on any day of the year has the halacha of a shlomim. So when you bring the carbon Pesach on any day of the year for any other carbon, it'll be like a shlomim that was brought for any carbon and it'll be kosher. So just like we say this, so we also say that any other carbon that's brought on any day of the year, l'shem de Pesach, will also be kosher. So v'yuchshuru acherim bizmanei l'shmai. So then I will tell you that other karbonis that are brought in the right time in the carbon Pesach, so should they be kosher? Shekein hu pasul l'shem acherim. So how could you say though? Again, let me read this again. V'yuchshuru acherim bizmanei l'shmai. Should I say that any carbon brought on Erev Pesach in its time of the Pesach, should it be kosher if it's brought l'shmai for the carbon Pesach? Shekein hu pasul l'shem acherim. But the carbon Pesach itself in that time period that's brought for any other carbon will be pasul then. So what's the point that Rabbi Eliezer is saying here? Here you see the point where Rabbi Eliezer says that we compare these two things. That a carbon Pesach l'shem acherim is pasul, so acherim l'shem Pesach will also be pasul. It goes both directions. But when is that though? That's only in the Zman of Erev Pesach in the afternoon, when you could bring a Pesach, and then if you bring the Pesach l'shem acherim, it'll be pasul. So therefore, if you bring any other carbon in that same time period, l'shem the Pesach, it'll also be pasul. That's Rabbi Eliezer's comparison, where he says that, like what Yosef ben Chayni said, that other karbonis l'shem Pesach in this time period will be pasul. It's from here that Rabbi Yochanan learned out that Rabbi Eliezer holds that we apply this not only regarding the Pesach, but we apply this also regarding the Chatos, because we see over here that Rabbi Eliezer is comparing. He says you go in both directions. If I see that the Pesach l'shem acherim becomes pasul, so I flip it around and say that the acherim, any other karbonis l'shem Pesach, will also be pasul. So I say the same by the Chatos. If a Chatos Shaloi Lishma. If I bring a chatas l'shem any other carbon, it's pasul. So I should say the same. Any other carbon that's brought l'shem chatas will also be pasul. Amalei Rabbi Shua, but Rabbi Shua says you can't say this because in Cain, if you're going to say this limud here, Hurata koyach Pesach, it comes out that the koyach of the carbon Pesach Shaloi Lishma will be less than the sata koyach b'shlomim, and the koyach by the shlomim will the halacha of Shaloi Lishma by the shlomim will be even stronger because all year round. The carbon shlomim is the time of the shlomim. Every day of the year. Every day of the year, it's a time to bring the carbon shlomim. And according to what Rabbi Eliezer is saying, if I bring a carbon shlomim in its time, on any day of the year, what's the halacha? It's going to be pasul, because it's being brought l'shem Pesach. Any day of the year. So that's been negated to the carbon shlomim. Been negated to the carbon Pesach. If you bring a carbon Pesach any shlomim that's shechted then for the Pesach, that is the okay, 1 second. What's just over here the lashon that Rashi over here says again, Horata koyach Pesach v'nesata koyach b'shlomim, that Pesach is going to be less than the shlomim all year round, which is the time of the shlomim. Here's the thing: if you shech the carbon Pesach, that is, if you shech the carbon Pesach every day of the year l'shem shlomim, it's going to be kosher. That's always the halacha. Pesach, the rest of the year, has the halacha of shlomim, and it's going to be kosher. So that shows how the psul of Shalei Lishma by the Pesach doesn't apply. However, on Erev Pesach, which is the Zman of the Pesach, any shlomim that's shechted then for a Pesach will actually be possible. So this shows that by the shlomim, you have more of a psul in the Shalei Lishma than there is by the Pesach all year that's shechted l'shem shlomim, which is going to be kosher. But the shlomim on Erev Pesach is going to be possible when it's shechted l'shem Pesach. So what's the question of the Gemara? How could you say that we have more of a psul Shalei Lishma regarding the shlomim than the Pesach? We learned earlier here in the Pedic that the Shalei Lishma by Pesach is definitely more than the psul, that is. The psul of the Shalei Lishma by the Pesach is definitely more than the Shalei Lishma by the Shlamim. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer brings a new limud. So Chazar Rabbi Eliezer then returned and came back, V'donei din acher. And he brought a different source for his halacha. And he said as follows: Mitzina Moisa Pesach Bo Shlomim. I find that what happens if you have a carbon Pesach that was left over, was not brought in its time, so it comes as a Shlomim. But Ve'im Moisa Shlomim Bo Pesach, but the leftovers of a Shlomim cannot be brought as a carbon Pesach. So I say as follows: Ma Pesach Shemoisrei Bo Shlomim. I see the carbon Pesach that if it's left over from the Pesach, it can be brought as a Shlomim. So every Pesach is connected to a Shlomim. However, shachta bismane l'shum shlomim, if you shechted in its time as a shlomim, pasul, it's going to be pasul. So even though it's every carbon Pesach is connected to a shlomim, but if you shecht the Pesach in its right time for a shlomim, it'll be pasul. Shlomim she'ein meisaram ba Pesach, a leftover of a shlomim that it's leftover, it does not come as a Pesach, meaning every carbon shlomim has no connection to a Pesach at all. Im shachtan l'shem Pesach bezmanoi en edin she'ei psulin. If so, if you shecht the carbon Pesach, carbon shlomim that is, in Pesach in the Erev Pesach in the afternoon, and it's time for a Pesach, for sure it should become pasul, because you're shechting it for something that has no connection to what this shlomim is. That's the new limud that Rabbi Eliezer said. Amalei Rabbi Shua. So Rabbi Shua answers to this and says, no, I'll bring you a proof from a different kind of carbon. Matzinu meiser chatos. We find regarding the leftovers of a carbon chatos. What's the leftovers of a chatos? What happens if a person, l'chatchila, when he was chayiv to bring a carbon chatos, he designated 2 animals for the chatos, and then he used one, and now he doesn't need the other. What happens with that leftover carbon of the chatos? Ba'ayla. You leave that to graze, it gets a mum, and then you use the money to bring an ayla. So we see that a carbon chatos has a connection to an ayla. It could end up being an ayla. But on the other hand, ve'ein moisa ayla ba chatos, but the leftovers of an ayla, if a person was makdish 2 karbanis ayla, and now there's leftovers of it, the money of this will not be used to bring a chatos from it, so a ayla has no connection to a chatos. So now, why wouldn't you say that it's similar kavachaymer? By a carbon chatos, which has a connection to the ayla. Because if the leftovers of this chatos could be brought as an aylas, but then shachta l'shem ayla, if you shecht a chatos shalei lishma, you shecht it for the ayla, what's the halacha psula? Every chatos that you shecht shalei lishma, including l'shem ayla, will be pasul. Ayla she'ein ma'isra ba chatos. So an ayla that has no connection to a chatos at all, you can't bring from its leftovers a chatos. So if so, you would say shachta l'shem chatos ein adin shetei psula. Don't you think that if you shecht an ayla for a chatos that it should be pasul? But this is not the din though. Only by a chatos, if you shecht it l'shem ayla, chatos and the pesach are the 2 exceptions that we say that if you shecht it l'shem a different carbon, it invalidates it completely. But you can't say by a ayla that if you shecht it for a chatos, it'll be pasul. But according to the logic of Rabbi Eliezer, why wouldn't we apply the same point over here regarding the ayla? Amalei Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer responds to this and says, no, you can't apply the same logic over here regarding the ayla. It doesn't apply here because ima marta b'chatos, the way you're trying to learn out from the chatos to the oila, shekein ksheiro lishma kol hashana kula. The carbon chatos, if you bring it all year round, then it's going to be kosher. So a oila that's shechted l'shem the chatos will also be kosher. However, over here by the Pesach, toima b'Pesach she'eina kosher l'shmoi elo b'zmana. A carbon Pesach that's brought for the sake of a Pesach, when is it going to be kosher? Only in its time on Erev Pesach. So we see a much bigger limitation regarding the carbon Pesach. So hoyel v'hu pasul l'shmoi dinu sheyivsulu acherim l'shmoi. Since I see by the carbon Pesach, if it's brought on any other day of the year, l'shem the Pesach, it's going to be pasul. So therefore, over here I'm telling you that if you bring any other carbon on Erev Pesach, then it's going to be pasul. But by the other karbanis, oila that's brought l'shem chatas, I don't apply the same thing. Okay, so this is this braise. So in the second part of the braise, Rashi says, you see over here that Rabbi Eliezer is saying this halacha specifically regarding other karbanis that are shechted in the time when the Pesach is brought. Not necessarily do we apply this by other karbanis that are shechted l'shem the chatos. But earlier in the braise it was mashma like Rabbi Yochanan said that it goes both ways. Anything that's shechted l'shem acherim, that's by chatos and the Pesach l'shem acherim, and acherim l'shem the chatos and the Pesach. It goes both ways. Okay, now going to the final opinion that was brought in the first mission of the Masechta. Shimon Achi Azariah Omer. Shimon, the brother of Azariah, said that when it comes to this halacha of shechting shalei lishma, so he said the rule is if you shecht it for something shalei lishma that's a level of kedusha that's higher than it, then it says it's going to be kosher. But if you shecht it for something shaloi lishma that's on a lower level of kedusha than it, then it's going to be pasul. So the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Masni Mishmei de Rav Yochanan. Rav Ashi dort in the name of Rav Yochanan, and Rav Acha Berei Rav Masni Mishmei de Rav Yanai, or it was said in the name of Rav Yanai. My time with the Shimon Achi Azariah. Where is the source in the pasuk for this point that Shimon Achi Azariah says? Because the pasuk says, "V'lo yechalalu es kodshe b'nei Yisrael es asher yerimu l'Hashem." Do not desecrate the kodshim of Yidden, which they separate for the Eibishter. Simple pshat of the pasuk, it's talking about kodshim or truma that you should not desecrate it. But we darshan from this pasuk that b'mura mehen, if your kavanah shalei l'shma is for something that's above, that's higher, a level of kedusha than what you're bringing now, aim is chalal. Then the pasuk says v'lo yechalalu. That kavanah shalei l'shma will not desecrate it. However, ben namuch me'en, if your kavanah shalei l'shma is for something that's on a level lower, mischalalim, it will become pasul. That's what this pasuk is teaching. That's what this pasuk is coming to teach. But this pasuk is teaching something else, which Shmuel taught. Shmuel said, how do I know that someone that eats from untithed produce, that this is tevel, he's chayiv misa for this? Because this pasuk says, do not desecrate the kodshim of Yidden, that they will separate. The pasuk uses a lashon future tense. Yarimu means that you were supposed to do it, separate, but you didn't separate it yet. This is a lav. And this is ba'asidim litra makasad medaber. You're going to separate and you did not yet separate. That's what the pasuk is coming to say, the lav, for eating from the tevel. And there's another pasuk where you learn out from, umeisu boiki chalalu, Rashi says, there's another pasuk that you learn that you'll be chayiv misa for this. So this is not talking about a halacha of shalei l'shma. It's talking about a halacha of tevel, completely different drasha from this pasuk. Says the Gemara, you could learn both drashas from this pasuk. Why? Because in Cain, if the drasha of this pasuk was only for the din of shaloi l'shma, like Shimon Achi Azariah said, so lichtiv kra asher hurmu. The pasuk should use the term hurmu, past tense. My asher yorimu. Why does he use a future tense of yorimu? Shmamina tarti. So I can also learn out regarding the tevel, future tense, meaning it was not yet separated. You were supposed to separate from your produce and you did not. This is the tevel that you chayiv misa for this. But on the other hand, though, because it says in the pasuk the term as kodshe b'nei Yisrael, it also refers to kodshim, to a carbon, and it's speaking about the halacha of shaloi l'shma, that if you're having the kavanah shaloi l'shma for a level above this carbon, it'll be kosher. If it's for a level below this carbon, then it'll be pasul. Boy, Rab Zera asked a shaila regarding Shimon Achi Azariah's opinion. What did he say? If it's a level above, then it'll be kosher. What does that mean? Ksheiden ve'ein meratzin. Do I say that you had this kavanah shalol lishma for another carbon that's above this level of kedusha of this carbon? It'll be kosher, but ve'ein meratzin. But for the owner, though, it will not appease for him, meaning he will not fulfill his obligation. And therefore, v'chipolig, this that Shimon Achi Azariah argues on the Tana Kama of the Mishnah, b'chad, he only argues with one point, because he agrees here regarding this point, like the Tana Kama of the Mishnah said, that any carbon that you have, any kavanah shaloi lishma, it will be kosher, the carbon, but it will not work for the obligation of the owner. So here as well, if you're having a kavanah shaloi lishma for another carbon that's a level higher than this kedusha, the carbon itself will be kosher, but for the owner, it will not work for his obligation. What is Shimon Achi Azariah arguing on? Regarding a carbon that's a level lower of kedusha than the carbon that you're bringing. Over there, Shimon Achi Azariah says it will be completely possible. So he's arguing only on one point. Or perhaps kisherin umeratzin. Shimon Achi Azariah is saying, if you have kavanah shalol lishma and it's for another carbon that's a level higher in kedusha, so then it's going to be totally kosher. Even the owner fulfilled his obligation as well, and therefore betarti pligi. And the argument here is actually on two different points. He's arguing regarding this kavanah shalol lishma that's a level up, then it's going to be totally kosher, and the owner fulfilled his obligation. Not like the Tana Kama that says that the owner did not fulfill his obligation. And he's also arguing when you bring the carbon for a level of kedusha that's lower, over here he's saying it's going to be totally possible. Not only for the owner, but the carbon itself will be totally possible. Amar Abaye says, V'teimer Rab Zrike, or Rab Zrike brought a raya. Look at what it said in the Mishnah itself. The Mishnah brought a few examples where the halacha of Shimon Achi Azariah applies. So the Mishnah says, Toshema, what did the Mishnah say? Ha-b'choir v'ha-maiser. You're bringing the b'choir and the maiser, sheshachtan l'shem shlomim. You brought it as a shlomim, kshedim. So it's going to be kosher because shlomim is a level up, higher than the b'choir and the maiser. However, shlomim sheshachtan l'shem b'choir and l'shem maiser, the shlomim that you bring for a b'choir or a maiser, psulin, that's a level down. So it's going to be possible. Now, if the point of ksherin in the words of Shimon Achi Azariah was to say that it's kosher and it works also for the obligation of the owner of the carbon, but that doesn't apply here. B'choir baritzuyu. By a b'choir, is there any obligation that the owner has to fulfill? There's no obligation. The b'choir belongs to the kayin and he brings it as a carbon and he eats the meat. There is no obligation that the owner has to fulfill. So we see elok ksherin. What does the term ksherin mean? The term ksherin means it's kosher. It's referring to the carbon itself. It's not talking about the obligation of the owner. This was one of the examples that the Mishnah said for the halacha of Shimon Achi Azariah. So the Gemara goes on, this is the second example that's brought. So since this second example, the term ksherin here has nothing to do with the obligation of the owner. It means ksherin regarding the carbon itself. So reishanami ksherin ve'imeratzin. The first example he brings is from kotche kotchim and kotchim kalim. So over there as well, when it says that it'll be kosher, it only means kosher, the carbon itself is kosher, but not that it'll work for the obligation of the owner. Says the Gemara, how can you prove from there? Midi area, why are you comparing these two cases? Kedisa. The term ksherin in every case means what it applies there. By b'choir, where there is no obligation for the owner, so ksherin is regarding the carbon itself. In a case where there is an obligation of the owner, so ksherin means also for the owner as well, maybe. So Elamai Kamash Malon. So the Gemara says, so what is the chiddush over here of this example that the Mishnah brings? Gavoya v'namuch Kamash Malon. It's bringing you an example of a kavanah shalei lishma that's above the carbon that you're bringing now, or a kavanah shalei lishma that's lower in the level of kedusha than the carbon that you're bringing now. That's the chiddush here. But Tanina, that it already says in the previous example of the Mishnah. Keitzad, the Mishnah says, Kotche kotchim sheshachtan l'shem kotchim kalim chulu. When you shech kotche kotchim for the sake of kotchim kalim, then it's going to be possible. But the other way around, because it's a level up, it's going to be kosher. So it already brought an example. What's the chiddush in the second case? Says the Gemara, the chiddush is ma'al detema, because otherwise I would say kotche kotchim v'kotchim kalim, only by these two levels of kedusha of kotche kotchim and kotchim kalim. Then I say hu deika gavoya v'namuch. I could consider it to be a higher level or a lower level. Aval kalim v'kalim, if both of the karbanis are kotchim kalim, like in the case of the shlomim and the b'choir and the maiser, they're both kotchim kalim. They're not the same, but they're both kotchim kalim. So loi, I would say that there's no higher and lower. It's all within the same category. So therefore, the Mishnah has to bring this second in, that even here, I say that Shlamim is a level up from the B'chayr and the Meiser. Says the Gemara, Tanina, this as well I see in the Mishnah later in the Masechta. It says there, Shlamim, Kaidmin is a B'chayr. The Shlamim is brought before a B'chayr because it has a greater level of Kedusha, even though they're both Kachim Kalim. Mipnei, Shein Tunin, Matan Arba, because by the Shlamim that is, you have to spray the blood 4 corners of the Mizbeach, Usmicha, and also the bleeding on the animal, Unusachim, the wine, Utunufis Chazav V'Shaik, and you have to lift the Chazah and the Shaik, which you don't have any of this by the B'chayr. So it's this concept that Shlamim is a level up. It already says in the Mishnah later in the Masechta. Answers the Gemara, no, ha ikke. In the Mishnah here, this is the main place where it says this point. Ahi, in the Mishnah later over there, Agav Grade. It only brings it Agav Grade when it speaks about the order of Karbanas being brought, so it brings that point as well. But over here is the main place where it's pointing out that even 2 Karbanas that are both Kachim Kalim, still I say that the Shlamim is on a level higher than the B'chayr and the Meiser.